Strokas asks, how do you deal with a difficult colleague with a spaghetti strainer?
Well, that's a tough situation right there. To me, the best way to deal with difficult folks is to try to nudge them toward a solution that works for everyone. And if that doesn't work, you can sneak in a spaghetti strainer while they're not looking and, add a little texture to the mix.
That's not what kind of example you want to be setting. Sometimes the hard way is easier. We all know that, but sometimes you have to be brave and confront the strainer. One time in law school, I was challenged by a particularly menacing-looking bowl of Lingen, but I refused to back down.
All right, all right. Now look here. I don't disagree with you, Prance, but let's consider the more passive approach. Like maybe show your colleague how the strainer can actually be useful. Could have used some of that advice myself when I was dealing with that one neighbor who wouldn't stop humming polka music.
Oh, that's a classic problem. But let's be honest, the only way to actually get a strainer in a situation like this is to draft up a written proposal. Write down your ideas and share it with your colleague. That's the only way to introduce the strainer without it coming off as a hostile action.
That's an interesting suggestion, Prance. I say let's give it a try. Go ahead, put those ideas down on paper and start the conversation. Everyone likes to feel respected, and that is a great way to show your colleague that you're willing to hear them out.
True, and you also want to make sure you're polite and professional when talking about the strainer. Chances are it can help you both reach a win-win situation.
Absolutely. Well, there you have it, folks. It won't be easy, but hopefully now we can both agree that it's entirely possible to bring a spaghetti strainer into the conversation.
Strokas asks, what do you make of the recent discovery that Genghis Khan was made out of licorice the whole time?
Wow, who would have guessed? I mean, I had my suspicions when I was reading those history books, but I just couldn't quite put the pieces together.
I'm not surprised. Licorice is a powerful and malleable substance. Plus, it's a lot better for conquering than marshmallows. My aunt used to tell me about the days when she used to fling water balloons filled with licorice to fight off the family's enemies.
That sounds like a hilarious, albeit sticky scene.
That's nothing. I can top it. My great-grandma would collect licorice that she found by the river, and then she would use it to make her famous licorice pies. That's how I know it's a powerful substance.
You know, that isn't such a bad idea. Who would have thought Genghis Khan was so resourceful? Prance. Absolutely. I'm sure he would have appreciated the humble liquorized pie. So I guess you never know what Genghis Khan will do next.
Or what he's made of, for that matter. I mean, who would have known it was licorice?
It's certainly strange, but it goes to show that anything is possible.
It certainly does. I'm a firm believer in the power of licorice.
Me too. I think we can both agree on that.
I think we can. Licorice forever.
Strokas asks, would vampire fiction be as popular as it is if they could only transmit jelly flavors telepathically?
Okay, the audience has asked whether vampire fiction would be as popular if they could only transmit jelly flavors telepathically.
What kind of question is that? That kind of question could never be taken seriously.
Well, I actually happen to read a lot of vampire stories, and I believe that they would continue to be popular. In fact, it might even add a unique element to the story.
That's ridiculous. I'm imagining a group of vampires all communicating their favorite flavor of jelly to each other with telepathy. What kind of bizarre plot line would that give rise to?
Well, I can think of at least one. Maybe one of the vampires really loves raspberry jelly and telepathically sends a shout out to the rest of the others. But none of them like raspberry jelly, and they decide to team up against the one who does. It'd be a great plot twist.
I've heard enough. There is absolutely no way that a vampire plot involving jelly flavors could be taken seriously.
I don't know. I think it could be pretty funny. In fact, I'm already thinking of a way to implement it in a novel
That's
I'm
absurd.
writing.
And anyway, if teleportation was the only way they could communicate, they'd just teleport all the jelly they need.
That's true, but it's a bit of a stretch. I'm guessing jelly wouldn't be the main focus of the plot.
All right, I think we can agree on that. But I still don't think it would be popular if they could only communicate telepathically.
Well, I guess that's a matter of opinion.
I suppose you're right. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion.
Strokas asks, is Mortal Kombat better or worse now that they replaced all the characters with Polaroids of goat knees?
You know, I actually remember playing Mortal Kombat when it first came out. It was a real blast. I'm afraid the same can't quite be said of the new Polaroid goat knee crossover version.
Oh, please, those goat knees have nothing on the originals. I'd even go so far as to say that these pixels make it easier to appreciate the finer aspects of the game. I mean, you can literally zoom right in to appreciate each flex of a goat knee. It's practically an art form.
Art form, prance. Have you seen a goat knee? That's not art, that's a joke. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention that the original soundtrack of Mortal Kombat was so much better.
Yeah, your nostalgia goggles must be thickening Sweden. Otherwise, you wouldn't start raving about the old soundtrack. At least with the goat knees, we can literally zoom each pixel for proper appreciation of the pixelated kneecaps.
All right. I concede the graphics point, but there's no way those knees can compete with the original Mortal Kombat soundtrack.
I'm sorry, Sneeben, but I just don't see it that way. I'm a firm believer that an interesting game is more than the sum of its parts, and I think Goat Knee Mortal Kombat is still as interesting and entertaining as it ever was.
That might be true, but I'm afraid I'm not convinced. I remember the days of head-to-head battles with friends, and that was always the highlight for me. And no matter how detailed the graphics, it just won't be the same with goat knees.
Even if that's true, it's still worth checking out. You won't know until you try it. Give it a chance, and I'm sure you'll start to appreciate the fine artistry of Goat Knee Mortal Kombat.
Strokas asks, will humanity ever have a firm understanding of how tunnels work?
Tunnels are a fascinating problem. With the rate of technological advancement, along with increasing demand for urban development, I'm certain we're on the brink of better understanding how tunnels work.
What are you talking about? Tunnels are a solved problem. You just dig a hole and drop something in. That's it.
Well, not quite. As evidenced by the engineering feat that was creating the Channel Tunnel between England and France, it's more complicated than that.
Don't even try to one-up me on tunnels. I once made a tunnel in my aunt's backyard when I was young. I put a lot of thought into that tunnel. Out of popcorn boxes.
Wow, that's quite an accomplishment. But it's nothing compared to the feat of creating the longest tunnel in the world. It spans over 50 kilometers under the Alps.
Wait till I tell my aunt. She won't believe this. In any case, tunnels don't require scientific knowledge. All you need is a shovel and some determination.
Actually, the idea of tunneling without scientific knowledge was debunked by a civil engineering scholar in the late 19th century. It takes a lot of research, planning, and math to make a tunnel.
Honestly, Sweeben, you have no idea what you're talking about. Leave the tunnel making to the pros, who know what they're doing.
That's not entirely true. I took a civil engineering class in university, and even I know the basics of tunnel creation. There may be a lot to learn, but that shouldn't keep us from trying.
I suppose you have a point. With enough research and study, hopefully humanity can learn how to build corridors through the earth with precision and safety.
Indeed, but only with the help of some dedicated and hard-working people in the field.
Strokas asks, I heard you helped the FBI take down a crab thief using your ability to transform into an ashtray for 7 seconds a day. Is this true?
Yeah, it's true. I had a chance to use my ashtray transformation power for the greater good, and I, of course, took it.
What's so great about becoming an ashtray? I don't get it.
In cobbled-together intelligence, we knew the thief was trying to hide something in the ashtray. An undercover agent posed as a customer. He bought the ashtray, and sure enough, there was something hidden in it.
What a silly thing to hide. What did he hide?
Are you ready for this? He had a lobster, a giant lobster. It was actually quite impressive. He somehow managed to squeeze this huge thing into this small ashtray. Kind of like that old-timey magician act where they'd fit a person into a box.
Yeah, definitely impressive, but a stupid thing to do.
It says something about his character. He was a thief and he just stumbled across this stolen lobster in someone's back garden.
What did the FBI do with it afterwards?
Oh, they released it back into the ocean, of course. They can't have these rare lobsters wandering around in ashtrays, now can they?
Hey, I guess not.
So, about my ashtray transformation power.
Let's just skip that part and move on to the next topic.
Strokas asks, what cheese flavors do you recommend for a wannabe time traveler?
Let's see. I think the best cheesy flavor for a time traveler would be cheddar because of its versatility. It can be used in all sorts of recipes, and it's a classic that's sure to transport you to all sorts of eras.
Nonsense! The only cheese flavor suitable for a time traveler is blue cheese. It has a strongly distinct flavor. It has a bit of a bite to it, and it's mature enough to bring you back to the days of kings and knights.
That may be true, but I suggest the time traveler bring along a bunch of different variations of cheese, even the moldy stuff to get the full experience.
Yeah, right. My grandma always told me to remember that the different flavors and textures of cheese can transport you through time.
Oh, wow. Your grandma was like a time-traveling cheese connoisseur or something.
Not just a connoisseur, Sweeben. She would go on long journeys through time with nothing more than a few slices of cheese.
Wow, that's quite an inspiring tale.
I know! In her later years, she was even known as the cheese matriarch. Speaking of which, I recommend swapping out different cheeses every once in a while to really get that time-traveling experience.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, I'd advise our time traveler to try switching up the cheese combinations in their sandwiches too.
Now that's a truly inspired idea.
Strokas asks, should I call my new band Boris and the Chutney Poisoners, or Tiny Eric and his Goose Loosener?
That's a great question. After careful consideration, I'm gonna have to go with Boris and the Chutney Poisoners.
You may think that's the better choice, Sweeben. But here's my opinion, and this comes from experience. I'm going to suggest Tiny Eric and his Goose Loosener. Just last summer, I was at a party and heard a group called Tiny Eric and his Goose Loosener, and everyone loved it. It was the funniest thing I ever heard.
I suppose it's hard to argue with experience, but I may have the last word. My cousin is the lead singer of a well-known band called the Chutney Poisoners, and they got their start selling out small venues. The fans really seem to love their unique sound. If I had to bet, I'd say Boris and the Chutney Poisoners is the way to go.
That's an interesting point, but wouldn't you agree that in the end, it's really up to the audience? They'll decide what earns the most laughs and will be the most successful.
Absolutely. It's the audience who will crown the winner. But I'm still going to stick with my original suggestion and side with Boris and the Chutney
Well,
Poisoners.
it appears we have some differing opinions. But maybe we can come to an agreement if we both back our own suggestions. How about we let everyone decide for themselves? Boris and the Chutney Poisoners, or Tiny Eric and his Goose Loosener?
Sounds like a fair compromise. Let the people decide. That's the beauty of democracy.
Strokas asks, what are the pros and cons of carrying 11 anvils in your pockets everywhere you go?
All right, that's the question. Anvils in your pockets, pros and cons. Now I think typically carrying anything heavy in your pockets is a no-go. I once carried my cat in my pocket and it was a disaster.
I think you're missing the point here. No one's advocating carrying 11 anvils. That being said, it may come in handy if you find yourself in a pinch and need a little extra weight. In fact, someone once suggested I do that for a physical challenge, and I aced
Okay, so
it.
anvils can be advantageous, but we should consider the drawbacks. For instance, the weight alone has got to be uncomfortable. What's worse is the anvils start sliding around, bumping into your leg as you walk. It's not a pleasant experience.
That's true, but don't forget the impact anvils can have on your wardrobe. They make it hard to find pockets that fit your clothing, plus it messes with the proportions of your outfit. It's like having a teacup tied to your belt with a piece of string.
Well, you don't have to worry about that if you're buying clothes with extra large pockets. There are plenty of styles out there that could easily accommodate the addition of anvils.
Yes, but then there's the issue of accidentally setting off metal detectors with all the anvil weight in your pockets. And as I'm sure you've come to realize, it also makes sitting down quite difficult.
Huh. Yeah, I can see that being a hassle. But on the flip side, you get to show off your strength by carrying a heavy load in your pockets like a true hero. So maybe the benefits outweigh the drawback.
Maybe. I guess all we can do is take a look at the pros and cons and decide for ourselves.
That seems fair. In the end, it's up to the individual and their level of comfort to decide whether or not to carry 11 anvils in their pockets.
Strokas asks, is 178 cubic miles of lipstick too much?
178 cubic miles is an insanity. We should be spending our resources on something more important.
Having an extra 178 cubic miles of lipstick might not be a bad thing. It could be a way to spread cheer and happiness. Think how many special occasions.
That's all well and good, but why would we waste our time on something so
But then
frivolous?
there's those days when you need a little confidence boost to make it through the day, and who knows what wearing the perfect shade of lipstick might rouse within you.
You're right. A little lipstick can be a boost, but 178 cubic miles of it, that's a bit much.
I'm going to have to disagree with you there. Perhaps it's time to consider a new perspective on the matter. After all, I'm sure we can all agree there's something empowering about wearing
Yes,
lipstick.
but the amount matters here. I mean, I've never heard of a store with enough lipstick to qualify as 178 cubic miles.
Well, I, for one, will take up the challenge to find that store.
I'd rather not waste our time on a challenge like that.
If we don't take up the challenge, how can we know what possibilities might be out there?
Possibilities of what exactly?
Well, imagine the possibilities of what could be done with so much lipstick. The fashion industry alone could benefit greatly.
All right, I guess we'll have to disagree on this one, but I still maintain that 178 cubic miles is too much.
Maybe we can agree to disagree on this topic. What do you say?
No way! We can still have a debate without agreeing to disagree. I mean, my great aunt Doris always said if you can't debate it, why even bother?
That's a great proverb. So here's something to consider. Why not put a limit on the lipstick we purchase?
Much better. That way, we can make sure resources are allocated effectively and there is still a sense of occasion.
Exactly. That's the best of both worlds.
Strokas asks, is it weird or practical that the gold standard has been replaced with the watercress standard?
Wow, what an interesting question. It was certainly strange when the gold standard was replaced by the watercress standard.
Oh, great. Here we go again with another one of Sweeben's ridiculous anecdotes.
Yes, it certainly raised some eyebrows back then. But I mean, after all, watercress is packed with nutrition, you know. And I mean, just think about it. Watercress helps create healthier citizens and can boost the economy too.
But on the other hand, it's just so absurd. Replacing gold with something as mundane as watercress, it's as if someone was suggesting we use kale chips instead of paper money.
Actually, Prance, that's not a bad idea. My uncle runs a kale chips factory, and he says,
All right, Sweeben, that's enough. The audience did not come here to hear about your uncle's business. They asked about the watercress standard.
well, I think the answer is clear. It depends on who you ask. If you ask me, it's practical, while if you ask Prance, it's weird.
Please! I didn't say it was weird, just that it was absurd and it's not a reliable source for our financial success.
Well, it's still infinitely better than using Kyle chips.
All right, you don't need to be a smart aleck. But really, neither of us should make any hasty judgment when we're discussing the watercress standard. There are pros and cons to consider.
Absolutely. Watercress is definitely good for our health, but it's still not as valuable as gold. So I think we can agree that it's a tough situation and we'll just have to see what happens in the future.
Strokas asks, should I take my crush on a romantic stroll through a bronze foundry?
All right, so our audience member wants to take their crush on a romantic stroll through a bronze foundry. That's a great way to get up close and personal with your special someone.
What? A bronze foundry? How romantic! You want to get your date to come over and smolder in the heat while watching molten bronze being thrown around? Have you heard of any date ending well that way?
Hey, I never said it had to be a conventional date. Do something unexpected and brave. This could be memorable.
Well, maybe if you know the person really well and you kind of have a thing for molten metalworking. I remember on one of my own dates, we took a trip to a high-end jewelry store.
Oh, a jewelry store. How
Yes,
creative.
They had this $1 million diamond necklace. I was just blown away by the craftsmanship that went into it.
You know, that kind of date may be ideal if money's no object, but what if money is an issue?
Well, if you want to do something nice but inexpensive, you could take a stroll around the city's botanical gardens. It's a much more pleasant than being around burning bronze. Plus, you can end it with a picnic on the grounds. That's what I did with my last date.
Wow, that sounds like a great experience. You don't have to spend a lot of money to have romantic time together.
Absolutely. Whatever you do, it's important to make sure both you and your crush feel truly special. That's what truly makes for a perfect date.
Strokas asks, leg, face, what's the difference? What's the difference with leg and face?
Leg and face are, of course, both commonly used terms for parts of the human body. But there's a fundamental difference in the way we use them and interact with them. When we talk about our face, it implies the whole of our visage. We don't just mean our mouth, or our nose, or our hair. We mean all of it, the whole package. However, with leg, we're ever referring to a specific part of the body.
Yes, I'd say that's quite an accurate assessment, and one which I'm sure many of us in the audience can appreciate. Let me supplement that with a personal anecdote of my own. When I was a child, I was playing in my garden with my brother Stephen. He unfortunately had a misadventure with a cricket bat that left me with a leg injury. He could only apologize.
And of course, I can sympathize with such a dramatic story. I've had a few misadventures of my own and have come to learn that life is all about taking care, whether it's our face or our legs. We need to support and protect one another, and it begins with those closest to us.
Yes, we do indeed. When Stephen apologized for that fateful incident, I made sure to explain to him that an "I'm sorry" is always a nice sentiment, but it's even better to demonstrate it in action. After all, taking care of ourselves and our friends is a lifelong mission that many of us haven't yet taken up.
Absolutely. So to return to the original question, what's the difference between face and leg? Well, I think the very fundamental difference is that with legs, it's one body part. But with face, it's the whole person we're talking about. A person's face reflects their inner beauty and should be treated with kindness and respect.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I think the audience gets it now.